"Is this a joke?" Prosecutor Dana Pierce sneered, her voice echoing with manufactured contempt in the cavernous courtroom. She gestured with a dismissive flick of her wrist toward the young man at the defendant's table. "You want this court to believe that a decorated officer with 17 years of service just decided to assault your client for no reason. They thought it was over. They thought the nail was in the coffin, the story sealed, the boy's future ruined. They had no idea the man sitting quietly behind him was about to rewrite the law. The courtroom was a study in beige and dread. The air, thick with the scent of old paper, polished mahogany, and stale coffee, felt heavy in Elias Vance's lungs. He sat on the hard wooden bench, a silent observer in the third row. His posture, a perfect line of stillness amidst the fidgeting and nervous whispers of other families, awaiting their turn in the grinder of justice. The incessant, low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was a constant, irritating pressure, a soundtrack for despair. He wore a simple charcoal suit, one he had purchased from a department store years ago for occasions just like this: funerals, court dates, parent-teacher conferences. It was meant to be anonymous. It fit him well enough, but it lacked the sharp, aggressive tailoring of the prosecutor's power suit or the self-important drape of the judge's robes. To anyone who bothered to look, he was just another concerned relative, another face in the gallery of the powerless. That was the point. Across the room, Officer Frank Miller sat beside the prosecutor's table. His uniform was so crisp, it looked like it could cut glass. Medals and commendations formed a small, boastful constellation on his chest. He was a man built of brick and certainty, his jaw set in a permanent sneer, his eyes scanning the room with the proprietary arrogance of a landlord surveying a tenement. He was the system personified. From his vantage point, Miller saw exactly what he expected to see: a scared kid, Jamal, his nephew, looking like a cornered animal at the defendant's table. A harried public defender shuffling through papers. He'd clearly only skimmed minutes before, and in the gallery, the kid's uncle, Elias. Just some guy. Miller's gaze passed over Elias without a flicker of recognition or concern. He saw a worn suit and a black face and filed him away under irrelevant. This was Miller's fatal flaw. The one Elias had been counting on. Miller didn't see people. He saw categories, stereotypes he could manipulate for his own benefit. He saw thugs, victims, and suckers. He never once considered the possibility of a predator hiding in plain sight. The inciting incident, the moment that had set this entire grim spectacle in motion, had been as mundane as it was ugly. A broken taillight. That was the official pretext. Jamal, a sophomore at the State University with a 3.8 GPA in engineering, had been driving his uncle's modest sedan home from the library. He was listening to a podcast on quantum mechanics. He was thinking about his midterm. Then, the world had exploded in red and blue light. Miller had pulled him over. The questions had been instantly aggressive, laced with an insidious prejudice. "Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Is this your car? Whose car is it?" Jamal, raised by Elias to be respectful but firm, had answered calmly, his hands visible on the steering wheel. He had asked why he was being stopped. That had been his crime. The audacity of a question. According to Miller's sworn report, Jamal had become verbally belligerent and physically aggressive. He had supposedly exited the vehicle in a threatening manner, forcing Miller to subdue him for officer safety. The result was a night in a holding cell for Jamal, a dislocated shoulder, and a constellation of charges: resisting arrest, failure to comply, and assault on a police officer. The last charge was the poison pill, the one that could derail his entire life. Now, Miller was on the stand, his hand resting on the Bible as if it were a personal prop. His voice was a practiced baritone, full of solemn gravity. As he spun his fiction for the jury, he was enraged, Miller boomed, his eyes flicking toward the jurors, gauging their reactions. He was a performer, and this was his stage. I've been on the force 17 years. I know the look. The boy was high on something. Maybe drugs, maybe just rage. He got out of the car, puffed up his chest, started shouting obscenities. Elias watched, his own expression a placid mask. Inside, a cold, precise machine was at work. Miller gestured with his hands, describing a physical confrontation that never happened. He claimed Jamal had shoved him, that he'd feared for his life. A cold, hard knot formed in Elias's stomach, but it was not fear. It was fuel. Prosecutor Dana Pierce guided Miller through his testimony with the skill of a seasoned director. She was sharp, ambitious, and had built her career on securing convictions, often by accepting the police version of events without question. She saw this case as a simple slam dunk, a young black man versus a decorated white cop. In this county, that wasn't a trial, it was a formality. She saw Elias watching her. Their eyes met for a brief second. She saw his unnerving calm and misinterpreted it as resignation, the quiet despair of the defeated. Her lips tightened into a smirk of professional satisfaction. This was too easy. During a brief recess, Elias went to the courthouse vending machine, his movements deliberate and unhurried. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his handler, Agent Sarah Jenkins. The text read, "I'm monitoring the live feed. Miller is burying him. Are you sure you want to let this play out? I can make a call. We can pull you out now." Elias bought a bottle of water. He took a slow sip, the cool liquid doing nothing to quench the cold fire inside him. He typed his reply with one thumb, his movements economical and precise. "The trap is set," he wrote. "He just needs to walk a little deeper into it. Stay on comms." He walked back into the courtroom and settled into his seat just as the proceedings resumed. He was not just an uncle. He was not just a concerned citizen. Special Agent Elias Vance, of the FBI's Public Integrity Section, had been undercover for 6 months, investigating this very precinct for a pattern of civil rights abuses. Miller wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was the linchpin of a corrupt system, and Jamal's arrest hadn't been random. It had been a gift, a terrible, painful gift that would allow Elias to burn the whole rotten structure to the ground. The public defender, a young, overwhelmed man named Ben Carter, began his cross-examination. He was earnest but outmatched. He poked at the edges of Miller's story, questioning timelines and inconsistencies, but Miller was too experienced. He batted away the questions with practiced ease, growing more confident with every answer. "So, you're saying my client, a student with no prior record, who was driving 5 miles under the speed limit, spontaneously assaulted you?" Carter asked. Miller leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension. "Counselor, you can't judge a book by its cover. I've seen choir boys turn into monsters in a split second. This student was a thug. Plain and simple. The word hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Thug. It was a weapon, and Miller wielded it with precision." Elias saw a few of the jurors nod almost imperceptibly. The poison was working. It was then that Prosecutor Pierce decided to escalate. She saw Elias's stoicism, not as discipline, but as a challenge. His calm defiance was an intolerable sign of disrespect. She decided to make an example of him, to crush the last bit of hope from the family and seal her victory. "The prosecution calls Elias Vance to the stand," she announced, her voice sharp. A ripple of confusion went through the courtroom. Ben Carter shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance." Mr. Vance is not a party to this case. Judge Marion Hayes, a woman whose weary expression suggested she'd seen every trick in the book, looked down at Pierce. Counselor, where are you going with this? Character, Your Honor, Pierce said smoothly. The defendant's character is central to this case. I believe the court will find it illuminating to understand the environment in which he was raised. It was a thinly veiled attempt to smear Jamal by association. Judge Hayes sighed, her patience wearing thin. I'll allow it, but keep it brief, Counselor. We're not putting the entire family on trial. Elias felt a surge of something cold and exhilarating. It was happening. She was taking the bait, more eagerly than he could have hoped. He stood, straightened his simple suit jacket, and walked toward the witness stand. His footsteps were silent on the worn linoleum floor. He took the oath, his voice steady and clear. He sat down, his back straight, his hands resting calmly in his lap. He looked directly at Dana Pierce, his gaze unblinking. Pierce paced before him like a predator sizing up its prey. She intended this to be a public humiliation, a final, unanswerable blow. Mr. Vance, she began, her tone dripping with disdain. You are Jamal's uncle? Correct. You've been his primary guardian for the past 10 years? That is correct, Elias said. His voice was even, formal. And what is it that you do for a living, Mr. Vance? She asked, already certain the answer would be something unimpressive, something she could use. Unemployed. Janitor. Something she could twist into a narrative of poverty and desperation. I'm a government employee, Elias answered truthfully. Pierce's smile was predatory. A government employee? How vague. What department? The DMV. Sanitation? The gallery tittered. I work in federal law enforcement, Elias replied, his voice still perfectly level. The slight shift in wording was a warning shot, but Pierce was too arrogant to hear it. She faltered for a fraction of a second, then recovered. Law enforcement, I see. A security guard, perhaps? A federal building, maybe? She was mocking him, trying to paint him as a mall cop with delusions of grandeur. From his seat, Officer Miller watched with growing amusement. He leaned over and whispered to his partner, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. Look at this guy. Probably directs traffic at the post office. Pierce continued her attack. You raised Jamal. So you're responsible for his attitudes, his disrespect for authority. Would you say you taught him to question police officers? I taught him to know his rights, Elias said calmly. I taught him that a badge is a symbol of public trust, not a crown. The prosecutor's face hardened. This was not the stammering, intimidated witness she had expected. His composure was infuriating. She decided to go for the kill. She turned and pointed dramatically at Officer Miller. Do you see that man? She demanded. A 17-year veteran. A hero who puts his life on the line every day. And you're telling this jury that he is the liar? That he is the one who acted improperly. Elias's gaze shifted to Miller. He held the officer's contemptuous stare. Yes, he said, the single word landing with the force of a hammer blow. Pierce was momentarily stunned by his audacity. She scoffed, turning to the jury with a theatrical eye roll. No further questions for this witness. She spat the last word like it was something foul. Judge Hayes looked at Elias. You may step down, Mr. Vance. He remained seated, a pillar of calm in the swirling storm of the courtroom. Your Honor, he said, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. With all due respect, I do not believe I am finished. The judge frowned. They are done with you. Your nephew's counsel can re-examine if he wishes. Ben Carter looked utterly lost, unsure of what to do. Actually, Your Honor, Elias said, his voice dropping slightly, gaining a new, harder edge. "I would like to dismiss Mr. Carter and proceed with representing myself." Pro se, quote, silence. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with low whispers, fell completely quiet. Even the hum of the lights seemed to have ceased. Dana Pierce stared, her mouth slightly agape. Officer Miller's smug grin finally evaporated, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Ben Carter looked at Elias as if he had just sprouted a second head. Judge Hayes leaned forward, her expression a mixture of irritation and intrigue. "Mr. Vance, this is a highly irregular request. You are a witness, not a defendant. You have no standing to represent yourself in this matter." "On the contrary, Your Honor," Elias said, his tone still impossibly respectful. "Under 1-8 U.S. Code Section 3771, as a victim of a crime being adjudicated in this court, I have the right to be heard. And the crime is not the fabricated assault my nephew is charged with. The crime is perjury, and it is being committed right now." He cited the statute with such casual precision that it sent a jolt through the room. Dana Pierce's face began to drain of color. She knew that statute. Every prosecutor did. But it was obscure, rarely invoked in a state-level proceeding. "Objection!" she barked, finding her voice. "This is an outrageous stunt. He's making a mockery of this court." "Is he, Counselor?" Judge Hayes said, her eyes now fixed on Elias, a new light of assessment in them. She had been on the bench for 30 years. She had seen thousands of faces, heard thousands of lies. She was suddenly seeing something in Elias Vance she had not seen before. She was seeing competence. Dangerous competence. "Your Honor," Elias continued, his voice now a quiet, lethal instrument. "I am not just a witness, and I am not just Jamal's uncle." He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his unassuming suit jacket. For a heartbeat, the bailiffs tensed. Miller's hand instinctively drifted toward his service weapon. But Elias did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a slim black leather wallet. He flipped it open with a practiced flick of his wrist. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the soft snap it made. He held it up for the judge to see. From the gallery, it was just a dark shape. But Judge Hayes saw it clearly. She saw the golden shield, the eagle, the unmistakable inscription. Her eyes widened. "Special Agent Elias Vance," he said, his voice now devoid of all warmth, as cold and hard as polished steel. "Public Integrity Section." The power in the room didn't just shift. It shattered and reformed in an instant. Dana Pierce staggered back a step, as if she had been physically struck. Her face, moments before flushed with arrogant triumph, was now a ghastly shade of white. Officer Miller shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What the hell is this?" he roared, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "Sit down, officer," Judge Hayes thundered, her gavel cracking like a gunshot. The authority in her voice was absolute. Miller, conditioned by years of courtroom hierarchy, sank back into his chair, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning terror. The predator had become the prey. "Agent Vance," the judge said, her voice now laced with a respect that was utterly absent moments before. "Please proceed." Elias stood. He didn't look at the prosecutor or the jury. He looked directly at Frank Miller. "For the past 6 months," he began, his voice resonating with federal authority, "the FBI has been conducting an investigation into the 44th Precinct, codenamed Operation Iron Shield. The investigation was initiated due to an abnormally high number of citizen complaints, alleging excessive force, illegal searches, and racially motivated harassment, many of them naming you, Officer Miller." He walked slowly from the witness box toward the prosecutor's table. his presence now utterly dominating the room. The cheap suit no longer looked unremarkable. It looked like a disguise. We had circumstantial evidence, statistical data, but we needed direct, irrefutable proof. We needed an officer to be so arrogant, so confident in his impunity, that he would commit a federal crime in broad daylight, under oath. He stopped directly in front of Miller. Miller was sweating now, beads of perspiration popping up on his forehead and upper lip. His bravado had completely crumbled, leaving behind a raw, twitching panic. When you illegally stopped my nephew Jamal Vance, you weren't just harassing a college kid, Elias continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. You were pulling over a vehicle that had been equipped by the FBI with 4 high-definition audio-enabled cameras. The entire stop, from your illegal pretext to your unprovoked assault on an unarmed citizen, was recorded. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Jamal looked at his uncle, his eyes wide with a dawning, incredible understanding. Elias turned to the judge. Your Honor, at this time, I would like to present into evidence a certified copy of that recording. I believe the court will also be interested in the audio from Officer Miller's body camera, which my team recovered from the precinct servers this morning. The footage you were provided by the department was edited. We have the original unredacted file, the one where Officer Miller is heard using a racial slur before he even stepped out of his patrol car. He placed a small, encrypted hard drive on the clerk's desk. It landed with a soft, final thud. This is outrageous, Pierce stammered, her career flashing before her eyes. This is entrapment. You can't. It is not entrapment, Counselor. When the subject shows a predisposition to commit the crime, Elias said, cutting her off coldly. And your problem is much bigger than entrapment. We also have the text messages between you and Officer Miller from last night, in which you actively coached him on how to embellish his testimony today. That's called suborning perjury. It's a federal offense. Pierce's legs seemed to give way. She gripped the edge of her table to keep from falling. Suddenly, the main doors of the courtroom swung open. 2 men and a woman in dark blue jackets with FBI, emblazoned in bold yellow letters on the back, stepped inside. They were followed by 2 uniformed U.S. Marshals. It was clear they were not there to observe. They were with Elias. They were his team. One of the agents was Sarah Jenkins. She gave Elias a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Frank Miller, Elias said, his voice ringing with the finality of a death sentence. You are under arrest for perjury in a federal investigation, conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, and obstruction of justice. Marshals moved toward a stunned, sputtering Miller. They pulled him from his chair. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was brutally loud in the silent room. They stripped the medals from his uniform, unpinned his badge, and unholstered his service weapon with practiced impersonal movements. You can't do this, Miller shrieked, his face contorted in a mask of rage and terror. I am the law in this town. Elias leaned in close, his voice a blade of ice. You were wrong. You were just a bully with a badge, and your shift is over. The agents then turned to a weeping Dana Pierce. Ma'am, Agent Jenkins said, her voice polite but unyielding. You are also under arrest for conspiracy and subornation of perjury. Please put your hands behind your back. The public and total destruction of 2 careers was complete. It happened in less than 5 minutes. In the very room where they had wielded their power with such casual cruelty. The jury sat in stunned silence. The press gallery was a frantic explosion of activity as reporters scrambled for the doors, their phones already to their ears. Judge Hayes slammed her gavel one last time. All charges against the defendant, Jamal Vance, are hereby dismissed with prejudice. This court is adjourned." She looked at Elias, her expression one of profound, weary respect. "Agent Vance, thank you." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the 44th Precinct. By sunset, as the headlines began to scream across the internet, the precinct chief was suspended, and a dozen other officers implicated by evidence gathered in Operation Iron Shield were placed on administrative leave. The entire precinct was indicted, metaphorically and literally. The U.S. Attorney's Office announced it was unsealing a massive racketeering indictment against the department's command staff. Frank Miller's ruin was absolute. He faced a slew of federal charges, each carrying a sentence of 10 years or more. Denied bail as a flight risk, he sat in a federal detention center, stripped of his uniform and his identity. His bravado was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed terror of a man who had flown too close to the sun and had his wings melted away by a justice he never believed applied to him. His wife filed for divorce the next day, citing a morals clause in their prenuptial agreement. His friends on the force, now facing their own indictments, abandoned him completely. The pension he had been counting down the days to was forfeited. The ultimate irony was his arraignment. Unable to afford a private attorney after his assets were frozen, the court appointed him a public defender. Dana Pierce's fall was just as spectacular. Her promising career was over. Disbarred and disgraced, she faced her own set of federal charges. The district attorney's office was thrown into chaos, and a special prosecutor was appointed to review every single case she had ever tried that involved testimony from Officer Miller. The review quickly expanded. Dozens of convictions were overturned in the following months. Men and women freed from prison because their freedom had been stolen by the lies of a corrupt cop and a complicit prosecutor. The news went viral. National outlets picked up the story, splashing Miller's sneering face and Pierce's tear-streaked mugshot across every screen in the country. The headlines were brutal. FBI's TINGTAKE's DOWENETIREPRECINCT HEROCOP's CAINEVOEBOFLIS PROSCHEONJERIS. Weeks later, Elias stood in a spacious corner office on the top floor of the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C. The view of the capital city was panoramic, a sprawling map of power and ambition. He wore his own suit now, a perfectly tailored Brioni, the uniform of his actual station. Across the mahogany desk from him sat the director of the FBI. Jamal was there too, sitting beside his uncle. He looked different. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. The charges had been expunged, his name cleared completely. A prominent civil rights fund, inspired by his story, had offered him a full scholarship to Georgetown Law School. He had accepted. "Agent Vance," the director said, his voice filled with genuine admiration, "your work on Operation Iron Shield was exemplary. You took a significant personal risk, putting your own family in the line of fire." "It was a calculated risk, sir," Elias replied. "I knew Miller's profile. His arrogance was a vulnerability. I knew he wouldn't be able to resist the bait." The director nodded. "You've done more than just take down a few bad actors. You've forced a systemic change. The consent decree will ensure federal oversight of that department for the next decade. You've given justice back to an entire community." Later that day, Elias was on the phone with Sarah Jenkins, walking through the final details of the case reports. "He really thought he was untouchable," Sarah said, a note of wonder in her voice. "Even at the end, he was screaming that he was the law. A stark white needle against the blue sky. He thought the badge made him a king. he said softly, summarizing the entire affair. "It's supposed to make you a servant. The law is a shield for the people, not a sword for the powerful." "He forgot that?" "Well," Sarah said, "you reminded him." "Yes," Elias said. "I did." He hung up the phone. He looked over at Jamal, who was reading through a constitutional law textbook, a small smile on his face. Justice had been served. Elias turned back to his desk where a stack of new case files was waiting. The work, he knew, continued. What an incredible story. That moment in the courtroom where Elias Vance revealed his FBI credentials was absolutely bone-chilling. He proved that true authority doesn't come from a uniform or a title, but from integrity and a mastery of the very system you operate within. Officer Miller and Prosecutor Pierce thought they were untouchable, that they were the masters of their little kingdom, but karma, in the form of a quiet, hyper-competent federal agent, came for them in the most public and humiliating way possible. If you loved watching this arrogant bully get exactly what he deserved, please smash that like button right now. Your support really helps the channel bring more stories like this to you every single day. And be sure to share this video with anyone who loves a satisfying story of karma and justice being served cold. Everyone has a friend who needs to see a villain get their perfect comeuppance. Most importantly, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on our daily drama and revenge stories. We have a new one waiting for you tomorrow. Now I have to ask you, let me know in the comments below, what would you have done if you were in Elias's shoes? Would you have had the patience to let the trap spring so perfectly? Let's talk about it. See you in the next video.